Most folks have not gotten the memo. The American capitalist system won't spend an extra dime educating children who they believe will end up in prison making commodities for corporations at 15 cents a day. Yes, the school system has failed many. However, there seems to be a disproportionate number of schools in Black and impoverished neighborhoods that were set up to fail, even after Brown v. Board of Education in 1954. Schools are closing at an alarming rate across the nation. Many of those schools are situated within heavily populated Black zip codes, with inner cities being hit extremely hard. For example, Chicago alone has closed approximately 155 schools over the past decade. About 88% of the students affected by the school closures are Black. In fact, more than 91% of displaced students at the 72 schools the city has closed since 2001 were Black, even though they make up 42% of the city's total public school population. Ironically, Detroit has closed 127 schools in the last decade. This has basically destroyed hundreds of Black communities and institutions that were built to service their needs. When you cripple the infrastructure, you ultimately handicap people from making money in that city. There is plenty of evidence to suggest that school closings affect Black people at a disproportionate rate, similar to that of the inmate population across the country. In essence, the school-to-prison pipeline works whether the Black community has a few functional schools or not, because it's all a numbers game. Large masses of Black people are going to come up with the short end of the stick. What do you think happens to them? Most will end up living at or below the poverty line, or even worse, stuck in the never-ending rat race of barely getting by despite their gainful employment. The numbers are just as glaring in Philadelphia, where 81% are Black. In both cities, more than 93% of the affected students come from poor families. The numbers have played out much the same way in other cities, such as St. Louis, Kansas City, Miami, Birmingham, Alabama, New York, Newark, New Jersey, Oakland, Houston, New Orleans, and Washington, D.C. I want people to see that this pattern is not coincidental or accidental, and it never is when it comes to the systemic displacement of Black people. Across the country, over 3,764 schools were closed during the 2008 to 2014 school years, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. These are not Caucasian children being affected. Now granted, you have poor children all over the country, but the mass closures are still only disproportionately affecting Black children and every melanin-based part of the spectrum. Instead of fixing the schools and making public education the center of the community where parents want to send their children, we are literally watching the destruction of Black communities, decaying infrastructure, and the rerouting of Black children outside of their neighborhoods. Sadly and intentionally, they are being sent to places that in the long run are no better than the places they left. It's not uncommon to see Black students traveling longer distances to get to school, often through unwelcoming neighborhoods, and being placed in classrooms that have swelled to the point where some students don't have desks to sit in. Even on the most mundane and basic levels, most of the Black community schools don't even have full-time nurses or school counselors. The outlook is bleak. I must admit that it is hard to remain positive, but we still must push on despite the structural deficiencies placed in our way. The system is designed to fail us. However, there will always be many of us who get through, because this is how the numbers game works. The objective is to destroy as many of us as it can without letting enough through that can truly make a difference. I get this question a lot. What is the structure that you keep talking about? Well, it goes a little something like this. At the top, you have the ruling class of people that are ultimately looking to profit off of children, whether they succeed or fail within the system. How is that possible? For example, if a student decides to pursue more education, they will end up going to college and pursuing a higher education degree. At some point in your higher education schooling, most of you are going to have to take out a student loan of some kind. They build interest over time and are extremely hard to pay back. You can get forbearances, deferments, and, if you're lucky, maybe even loan forgiveness, but you will end up paying back more than you borrowed for sure. After receiving this education, most of you will not actually make enough money to live above the working poor status that so many of us don't strive to reach, but end up there anyway. Remember, it's a numbers game. On the other side of the equation, for those who don't make it through the system, there is a prison cell waiting for you to fail at life. Once you end up in there, you lose your 13th Amendment rights and can become a slave to corporations that will hire you for less than $1 an hour in many cases. There are so many layers of traps at every level, so we must do our due diligence and at least acknowledge the obstacles. Too often, we tend to go through life as if the school system is supposed to be this way. Well, I'm here to inform you that it doesn't have to be. In sum, one solution would be to move back towards more trade-based schooling and focus on science, technology, engineering, and math. This can be done, but we must work together to do it long-term and slowly move away from the current 1950s model of sending children to school to become workers. Thank you for watching.